Alright, so here we go with our first lesson on dividing fractions. So after today's lesson, I will be able to divide fractions by fractions and divide fractions in whole numbers. I would strongly encourage you at this point to make sure that you have some colored pencils with you, or some crayons, or even pens that have different colors. It's going to make some of our examples easier to see. Alright, so first and foremost, I want you to think about, is 4 divided by 2 the same thing as 4 divided by half? This is what we're going to be modeling with our division strips. So first of all, I need you to make sure that you're reading it correctly. This is 4 divided by 2. And this is 4 divided by half. That's different than saying 4 divided in half. Okay, we're dividing by half. So this would look like this, and this one would look like this. Okay, so think about what it really means to divide 4 by 2. And what you're doing is you are taking, I'm going to type this out so it's a little bit easier for you to see. So when you're dividing 4 by 2, you are taking 4 pieces and putting them into groups of 2. Okay, so that's what's happening when you're doing 4 divided by 2. So keeping that in mind, let's think about what's happening when you're dividing 4 by half. So if when I took 4 and divided it by 2, I was putting those 4 pieces into groups of 2, what that would mean now is that I'm taking 4 pieces and putting them into groups of 1/2. Okay, so I'm not putting them into groups of 2 anymore. I'm putting them into groups of 1/2, which you have to think of. What is 1/2? What does that mean? What does that look like? Okay, I'm not splitting it in half. I'm literally taking it and putting it into groups of 1/2. So that's the size of my actual pieces. So let's use your division strips to take a look at what that means. So here, if I take 4 and I divide it by 2, like I said, we're taking it and we're putting 4 pieces into groups of 2. So I'm actually going to copy that over here. Okay, so we're taking 4 pieces and putting them into groups of 2. So here's one group of 2, and here's the second group of 2. So how many groups did I make? And that will give me my answer. Okay, well, I have one group of 2, and then I have a second group of 2. So by taking 4 and putting it into groups of 2, I made 2 groups. Okay, so now let's think back to when we took it and said we're putting them into groups of 1/2. Well, now my pieces aren't going to be the same size. Okay, because before when I did this, my pieces were still the same size. So 1 was equal to 1. And so on and so forth. So this right here was a whole piece. Now I want to put them into groups of 1/2. So I have to take these pieces and I actually have to split them in half. So here's a half, here's a half, half, half. Because what I'm doing is I want 1/2. So there's 1 group, 2 groups, 3 groups, 4 groups, 5 groups, 6 groups, 7 groups, and 8 groups. Okay, because I'm taking them and I'm putting into groups of 1/2. So I only want half of a piece, and that will give me a full group. So again, here's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 groups of 1/2. So 4 divided by 2 and 4 divided by 1/2 are completely different things. Especially looking at our answers, that can tell you that. So again, let's look at this one. So you're taking 3 and you're dividing it by 2/3. So that means, so think about what it means. and I would encourage you to write this down to help you work through this. I'm taking my 3 pieces and putting them into groups of 2 thirds. So what that means is I have to actually take my pieces and cut them into thirds. So I have 1, 2, so there's one group cut into thirds. Here's another group cut into thirds, and here's another group cut into thirds. Now, in order to divvy it out, I have to put 2 of each of the thirds into one group. Okay, so here's 2 thirds, so that's one group. Here's another 2 thirds, so that's 2 groups. Here's another 2 thirds, so that's 3 groups. And then here's another 2 thirds, so that's 4 groups. So far, okay, because it doesn't matter that one of my thirds came from a different piece, you just have to think of it kind of like you were ripping up the paper into the sizes and then divvying them out. So here I have one group of 2 thirds, 2 groups of 2 thirds, 3, 4, okay, and the mistake that people make is that they say, okay, 4 and 1/3, but this isn't 1/3. This is 1 out of the 2 that I need to make a whole group. So I make 4.5 groups because I only have one of these out of the 2 that I need, so it's 4 1/2. All right, so that's why when we divide with fractions, our answers look kind of funky. Because what we're doing is we're actually taking our pieces and making them smaller. And by making our pieces smaller, it makes more of them. All right, so here is an Explore activity that I wanted to go through with you, and it gives you kind of another way to look at it. Let's look at A, where we have 3/4 cup of salsa, and we're making burritos with it. Each burrito requires 1/8 cup of salsa. How many burritos can I make? Okay, well, 3/4 is what I have. All right, so to find the number of burritos that can be made, you will need to determine how many 1/8 cup servings are in 3/4 of a cup. So if I take my picture here, and I know it's already drawn for you, so I'm actually going to draw it and give you a little bit more of an explanation. So this whole thing right here, so from here to here, equals 1 cup of salsa. And then we can split it. And we can say, here's 1/4, here's 1/4, and here's 1/4. Okay, so now it's split into fourths. Well, then the other thing that I would need to do is I would also need to look at it and say, okay, well, there's the 3/4, so this is what I have, so we can only look at this much. But now 1/8 of a cup is what I need for a burrito. So I have to look and see, okay, this whole thing, ignore the fact that these are fourths. Now I need to break this into eighths. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and then there's 8. However, these I can't use because I only have 3/4 cup of salsa. So then here is 1 serving, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So there are 6 1/8 servings in 3/4 cups of salsa, so I can make 6 burritos. 5 people share a ½ pound of cheese equally. How much cheese does each person receive? All right, so right here, again, this is your 1 pound of cheese. And let's be honest, we're from Wisconsin. We're not going to share any of our cheese, but these people are. So I have 1 pound of cheese, but I'm only looking at half of it, okay? Because that's all that we have is the 1/2. And I need to split it among 5 people. So I need to figure out, I need to determine how much is in each of the parts. Okay, so to find out how much cheese each person receives, you need to determine how much is in each of. So I'm going to take this, and I know right now that this is 1/2, and then I need to split this into 5 pieces, but you have to think. So each person right here, that's what they're getting. Okay, and we're going to ignore this because what I'm going to tell you here is going to make a little bit more sense. So here we've split this into 5 smaller pieces, but remember that idea, what I do to one I have to do to the other. So I can't just split the 1/2 pound and say that that's it. It's the full pound that would technically be getting split into 5 pieces. So this isn't worth 1/5, this is worth 1/10. So each person would be getting 1/10 of a pound. Because if I split this into, give this to each of the 5 people, I have to do the same to the other 1/2 pound, even though we don't have it. All right. All right, so now it's time for some vocabulary terms. So reciprocal. The reciprocal is the number that when multiplied by another number gives you 1. This is also called the multiplicative inverse. You want to make sure that you know that. So here I have 3/4 and 4/3. Notice that the 4/3 is just the number flipped. That's literally what we do when we try to find the reciprocal, is we flip the number. Because if you see, I take 3/4 and I multiply it by 4/3. And remember, we multiply straight across. And I get 12/12, which equals 1. So 4/3 is a reciprocal to 3/4. And on that same token, the multiplicative inverse is the number that when multiplied by another number gives you 1. Again, this is also called the reciprocal. So we have 2 words or 2 terms that mean pretty much the same thing. Okay, except for when we talk about multiplicative inverse, a lot of times you'll hear that in working with integers and rational numbers. We are going to refer to this more so as the reciprocal. Okay, so again, the reciprocal of 4/7 would be 7/4, because when you multiply it, you get 28 over 28, which is equal to 1. So again, all you're doing is you're flipping that number. So let's practice this. What is the reciprocal of 7/8? Well, again, just in case you're confused, this is 7/8, and I'm just going to flip it. Woo! So it becomes 8/7. But then now, what's the reciprocal of 8? A lot of students get confused here and they like to just put 8/1. But you have to remember, 8 is actually equal to 8/1. So that isn't flipped yet. We actually now have to flip this and we get a reciprocal of 1/8. So don't forget, when you have a whole number, you need to first make it improper, then flip it. All right, so our steps for dividing with fractions. Make sure you're filling these out and that you have these to reference later on, because they will definitely help. So first, we have our magnifying glass, which tells me I'm looking for something or I'm finding something. So I am going to find the reciprocal of the divisor. Find the reciprocal of the divisor. Now remember, the divisor is the number that's doing the dividing. It's always the second number in the division problem. So the reciprocal of the divisor in this case would be 3/7. Now I have my little symbol here that tells me that I'm going to get to multiply. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to set up the problem as a multiplication problem. So now I'm going to use my original 1/8, and instead of division, I'm going to multiply. And instead of 3/7, I said the reciprocal, whoops, I wanted to find the reciprocal of 3/7. That reciprocal is 7/3. How many of you caught that? I hope you're all raising your hands, especially since it'll look kind of silly with you raising your hand at home. So here we have 1/8 times 7/3. And now I'm actually going to do that multiplication. And I get 1 times 7 is 7. And 8 times 3 is 24. And then my last step will be to simplify or convert when necessary. So in this case, 7/24 cannot be simplified, so my answer is simply 7/24. All right, so let's go ahead and try another one. So here I have 2/5 divided by 1/8. Again, my first step is to find that reciprocal of the divisor. So the divisor is 1/8. So the reciprocal is 8/1. Don't just leave it as 8. My second step is to multiply. So I get 2/5 times 8/1. And when I do that, I get 16/5. And my third step is to convert and simplify. I know this is improper, so I take 16, divide it into groups of 5. I can make 3 groups. I'll use 15 pieces with 1 left over, so I will have 3 and 1/5. All right, let's try another one together, just in case you're still struggling. Go through it with me. If you feel like you've got it, what I do want you to do is I do want you to try it on your own and then come back and you can check how you did. Another little quick trick that I give students to help them remember is to keep, change, and then flip. All right, so I keep my dividend, I change the problem to multiplication, and then I flip the divisor. Now I actually get to multiply, and I get 12/10, and now I have to convert. I have 12 pieces, and I'm putting them into groups of 10. I can make 1 group with 2 left over, so my answer would be 1 group with 2 out of 10 left over. I know 2/10 can be simplified by 2/2, and that gives me 1/5. So my answer would be 1 and 1/5. All right, and again, I got another problem for you here, and I added one where we have a whole number, okay? So remember, the first thing we need to do, even before we start to do our keep, change, flip, is turn that whole number into an improper fraction. So I have 1/5 divided by 4/1. Now let's do our keep the 1/5, change to multiplication, and then flip our divisor. Now I can multiply. I get 1 times 1 is 1. 5 times 4 is 20. So my answer in this case is 1/20. Okay, and then the last piece here that I left for you, I left you some problems. Looks like it says guided practice on it, and I do want you to solve those problems on your own so that way you can check them when we come back to class and see how you're doing. And as always, if you have any questions, please be sure to write them down or email me so we can go over them in class.